Welcome everyone to our doctoral student success series. We are talking about the IRB process and publishing our research. I am Dr. Shay Kirchhoff in the College of Education at UMSL. So the first thing to know about the IRB is that the IRB is intended to protect human subjects. So IRB stands for Institutional Review Board, and their job is to protect human subjects. So that's not language we use even as researchers, and definitely not just in conversation in our personal lives. So what do we actually mean when we're talking about human subjects research? What we mean are living individuals about whom the research is about their experiences. If there's an intervention that the humans are involved in, so the human is doing something, or there's an interaction between the researcher and the humans. That interaction can be in the recruitment stage, the data collection stage, or the data analysis stage, at any stage in the research. Human subject also refers to identifiable private information. So identifiable means that you can match the information to the human. If people's names are on it, then that's an identifier. But our names aren't our only identifiable things. So social security number, student ID number, even birth date. So depending on how big or small your sample is, if you're talking about people at UMSL and you're using the birth date, you're going to be able to identify the person or at least have a pretty good guess. And then biospecimens are also considered part of human subjects. So the second part is that the IRB is there to protect human subjects in research. So we have to define research. The common rule defines research as a systematic investigation, including research development, testing, and evaluation designed to develop or contribute to generalizable knowledge. So it's systematic and it's intended to create new knowledge. Additionally, the Belmont report. So the Belmont report is a federal report about protecting humans in their context of research, defines research as an activity designed to test a hypothesis and permit conclusions to be drawn through a formal study plan with a set of procedures to reach an objective. Now, the reason that's important is because you have to ask yourself if what you are doing is human subjects research first, and if your answer is yes, then you need to submit an application to the IRB. Okay, so first step is what I'm doing human subjects research? So let's try it out. Number one, a faculty member analyzes de-identified publicly available census data to examine regional health trends. According to our two definitions, is this human subjects research? And you can unmute and answer. All right, CJ says no. Why? Do you have a justification for your answer?
Yeah, I would say multiple. One, de-identified, so it's not identifiable to a specific person. Two, it's publicly available, so there wouldn't necessarily be a expectation of privacy. And I don't know if it would be considered research because it's just examining a trend, not necessarily then doing anything with that.
Okay. So because and another reason is there's no interaction between the faculty member and the participants. So it's de-identified, it's publicly available. So that means it's not human subjects. But the other thing is we're not interacting with the people. So that also makes it not human subjects. And then we're not sure yet if this is even research. Now, if they were to, what would they have to do in order for this to be considered research? Contribute to
knowledge.
Yep. Contribute to generalizable knowledge. So if they're just looking to see if flu is up in their region, that's not, they're just looking to see if they're going to go let their kid go to prom or not. I don't know. That was the weirdest example. But
I'm very
if they're
anti-prom right now.
um, but if you're looking to present at a research conference or a conference or publish, then that is considered contributing to generalizable knowledge. That gets us that do qualitative researcher a glitch a little bit, because I'm like, well, none of my work is generalizable, right? But it's contributing to it's contributing to generating knowledge. And the body of qualitative research is generalizable, even if my one study is not considered generalizable. Okay, number 2. A department conducts an internal program evaluation using aggregated course grades to improve curriculum quality. Is this human subjects research?
I would
Rosie?
say no, because it is specific to that program and is meant to like be a quality improvement effort and not to like further research.
Yes. So evaluations are evaluations. Evaluations are not research, even if you use the exact same methods. So evaluation methods are the same methods as research methods, but the goal is different. The goal is to improve curriculum quality. However, if this department were to conduct change the word evaluation and say action research, and then say to improve curriculum quality and contribute to the knowledge on curriculum and instruction, then it is research. So if you're going to present your findings at a research conference, it turns into research. And then instead of using the word evaluation, I use the word self-study is a word that's used in higher education. In K-12 education, we use the term action research.
What if you conduct something like that and then you decide to present it at a conference, or it's like, ooh, this is really great. We want to publish on like an emerging innovative idea. Would you need to retroactively go? Yeah, how does that work?
There's no such thing as retroactive in the IRB. So make that decision up front is the correct answer.
Okay.
So that's the correct answer. So the thing is, you can't do it if it's not IRB approved. But just because it's IRB approved doesn't mean you have to do it. So if you think, hey, I'm doing the systematic thing, part of my passion in life is research, or in my case, part of my job expectation is research. I personally would not do number 2 without an IRB because I'm expected to contribute research on education as part of my job. So anything I do that I can research, I research. That the strategy is to get the IRB so that you can, rather than try to think of it afterwards. Yeah.
Yeah, we're in my department at WashU, we're undergoing some curriculum revisions.
Yeah.
So this is good.
Yeah. And the thing is, it takes 1 year to do the evaluation. It then takes another year to publish the evaluation. So it is more work. It's just not as much work as starting a research study from scratch, right? Because you're doing half of it anyway. So when I was a doc student and when I was an early career faculty, my strategy was definitely to research anything I was doing. When I did my trips to Kenya, I researched it. When I was revising my courses, I was doing action research. Let's say that they are intending to present the information at a conference. So it's not just the survey, but they are intending to present.
I mean, yeah, that's what we're doing right now.
So what makes that one different than the number one? So what's the difference between 3 that makes it research?
You're soliciting information from humans, not looking at, I guess, data that's already out there.
Right. So that interaction happens at the recruitment stage because you are reaching out to them to get them to. And then also, even though it's anonymous, that doesn't mean that there wouldn't be enough identifiers to tell who the person is. So like, let's say you asked for their telephone number. Well, then it's not anonymous anymore because that identifies the person. So even though your intent is anonymous, doesn't mean it actually is. That is what the IRB process is for, to make sure that what your intention is what you're actually doing, and that the way you're saying your participants will be protected actually will be protected.
Okay, so our
That's-
study, we are doing archival data. So our study ends up being non-human subjects research, but we still had to do IRB. We just had to do this very odd form. Is that true for general studies, or is that because it's part of a dissertation?
I have thoughts, but no answers. So my thoughts are that I tried to pull the information from the Belmont report and the common rules documents. I wasn't pulling specifically from UMSL, thinking that some of you may get tenure track positions at a different institution, and or like Rosie's at WashU. So the common rule and the Belmont, these are federally recognized documents. However, the interpretation of these documents varies by institution. And so sometimes the person who is the director or the officer of the institutional review board is a researcher. Sometimes they're a lawyer. Sometimes they're an administrator. So they may come from different life experiences and bring those lenses with them. So when I was at one university, the person was a lawyer, and it was all about protecting the liability of the institution. Even though I find that here it's about protecting the participants, the rights as defined by the United States federal reports, like in the common rule for the participants. Different places have different interpretations. Okay, I have been doing IRBs for 13 years, and I have never completed an IRB without having questions about what I'm supposed to do or what I'm supposed to put here, or is this exempt or is this expedited? Like, it is always a difficult decision-making, critical thinking exercise. So it's okay if that's what it feels like. There are 3 levels of review at all institutional review boards. Exempt review does not mean it's exempt from IRB review. It means it's exempt from the convened full board review. Expedited review means it still will be reviewed by the board, but they won't, not necessarily at the convened meeting. And then the convened review is a full board review at their meeting, and that happens once a month. There's 3 levels. Exempt is the least invasive, if you were. And then convened is the most sensitive kinds of research. So what the IRB is asking in order to determine if something is exempt from the full board review is, are there vulnerable subjects? So vulnerable subjects include, in the United States, the age is 18 and under, and then every country would have their own legal status for vulnerable subjects. Prisoners are considered a vulnerable subject, especially based on the history of abuse that has happened in research. Anyone know other vulnerable populations?
Pregnant people? People
And I
who are
believe,
unable to give, full consent due to
Yes.
a disability or
What about individuals with disabilities? Well, I guess that would, developmental disability would be unable to give consent.
yep, developmental or intellectual disabilities, people that cannot give full consent.
I don't remember the
Um,
word to describe it, but isn't it like when you're like in a hospital and you're under like health distress? I just remember in the training, like there was an example of like you're in like a life or death situation. They're like asking you to consent to research, which is important, but
yeah,
can you really give a reasonable consent to that moment?
right. And then also elderly. So same like kind of thinking around all of these is that ability to give consent. Are these people able to give a fully informed consent? And do they have the power to do so in that situation? The other thing the IRB is going to ask is, does the researcher plan to collect or keep direct identifiers? So we talked about the identifiers, name, but there's other things that can be an identifier also, address, phone number, birth date, or those indirect identifiers like a collection of demographics. So let's say in Robin's research, she's not collecting names or email addresses, but I say that I'm between 45 and 50, I'm white, I'm a female, I'm a professor at UMSL in chemistry. Well, then there's only one, right? So like, so then you know it's me, because once you put all those demographics together, then it is identifiable. If the answer is yes, then they ask the next question. So if it's vulnerable subjects, then it's not. If the answer to that is yes, then it is not exempt. If you plan to collect identifiers, then we have to go to the next question. Well, is any of it private or sensitive? And would collecting or retaining it pose any risks? And so if the answer to those two questions is no, then it can continue to be exempt. If the answer to any of those two questions is yes, then it's not exempt. All right, there are 8 exempt categories, but I just wanted to point out the ones that are the most commonly used in higher education research and or research done in educational research. So number 1 is interesting because this is if it's done in accepted educational settings. So if I go into a K-12 school, but I'm not asking them to do anything different than they're already doing, then it's exempt. Even though there are children in that room, I'm not interacting with the children. I'm only interacting with the teacher. And I'm not asking them to do anything different. Or maybe I am asking them to do something different, but not as the researcher. So the teacher is the one or something. So that's great news for most of us who want to do research around curriculum and instruction. The next is number 2, which the research we talked about on the last 2 slides ahead is that survey. So this is exempt 2 is there are interactions, but it's either like a test, like a scale, like I'm giving the teaching for global readiness scale, or I'm giving the environmental agency scale or survey. Or the other one is observation of public behavior. So you're in a place and there's no expectation of privacy, or it's in an educational kind of setting, you know. It can be that if you are not collecting identifiable information, or if you are, the questions are not sensitive or would pose a risk to anyone. So what do you think they mean by that? Like, what would be the kind of questions that could pose a risk or be sensitive in nature?
If you're asking if someone would disclose committing crimes.
I would say sexual behavior too could be damaging. One that gets me. So we're doing a study on financial challenges of single parents in college settings. And the way that we asked the questions, it was considered exempt because we weren't necessarily asking direct financial questions, although I would say that financial information could be potentially damaging and or pose like we might not have asked the question, but if someone were to say like, yes, I committed fraud to get a scholarship or something. Yeah, so that's like a very weird kind of gray area for me.
So I always ask myself, would the person be fired if their boss found out, would they be fired or would they go to jail? Or would it be embarrassing for them to answer? And so that's where you get to that gray area, right? About like the embarrassing. It might be embarrassing, but it's not going to get you fired. And so how embarrassing is kind of that gray area. If it could re-traumatize a person. So if it's about trauma and talking about it is what could introduce re-traumatizing the person, then that is also considered sensitive. It doesn't mean that we should not do that research. It just means that we need protections in place for our participants, and therefore it's not exempt from full board review, because the board is going to help us protect our participants by ensuring that we're following best practices. Okay. So I think sometimes when we go through these, people forget that this doesn't mean you can't do that. This just means it's not exempt. These are the categories for exempt. Number 3 is a benign behavioral intervention. 4 is secondary research. So that could be considered also. So archives could be considered secondary research. And it's if it's de-identified. So maybe the original researcher has that information, but they're not giving you the identifiable information. That's exempt. Expedited has different categories. And just, oh, that's a spelling error. But expedited has its own. But what you really need to know is whether it's exempt or whether it's a full board, because if it's neither of those, then it's expedited. So if it's exempt, it's exempt. And if it's any of these things, then that means you need the convene full board. So you need to make that decision before you go into your IRB application. At the University of Missouri St. Louis, we use a system called eCompliance, and you can find this on the UMSL Human Subjects Research IRB webpage. So this is the web page, and on this page, if you scroll down, you'll see the eCompliance system. It's right here. So when you get to the eCompliance system, you sign in with your SSO. From there, this is the dashboard, and you will click the institutional review board. And then what you'll have to do first is the city program IRB training, an in-depth training about protection of human subjects. And you have to do that within the eCompliance system so that it links it to your UMSL SSO. Once that is completed, then you can go to the IRB forms and start a new application. The first page is going to ask who you are. So if you are doing this for your dissertation, you're going to say student investigator. There are other choices there though. So let's say you graduate and you get a job, you would probably choose primary investigator. The primary investigator is the person who is the leader for the research. There needs to be at least one person who's authorized to obtain consent. That means that's the person who is interacting with participants. And there needs to be at least one person who is the primary contact. That's the person that the IRB office is going to communicate with. So you fill that out, you hit begin IRB application. It will then ask you to include anyone else. If it's your dissertation and it's co-authored, you need one IRB for the study, not per person. So whoever fills it out will then add an investigator, will add their co-author, and then also add your advisor. So on your dissertation, you have to add your advisor. and you choose their role as advisor. You then put the title. The title should be the exact same title as your dissertation title. Once you are a faculty member, or if you're working as a graduate research assistant and filling this out, like it says here, the title should be the same title as the grant. So if it's grant funded, it needs to be the same. So the title does matter here because it needs to line up with other systems at the university level. Then it's going to give you a page that looks like the IRB slide that we saw here. And you're going to have to say, if it is exempt category 1, you would check number 1. If it's 2, you would check number 2, etc. If it is none of them, then there's a place for you to check not exempt, which then leads you to this page. So that's why you have to figure out if it's expedited, exempt, or full board before you do the IRB, because that's the first basic question it's going to ask. Once you do that, you're probably doing social behavior educational. And there should not be a conflict of interest, because if there is, you need to think about that. So a conflict of interest is if you would make money or you would have a financial stake in the findings. So for example, if Advil does a study about whether ibuprofen helps headaches, that's a conflict of interest because they sell ibuprofen. That doesn't mean they can't do the study. It just means that they're doing the study with a conflict of interest. So most likely you should be saying, no, there should not be a conflict of interest. The next page is going to ask you to have a description of your participants. Who are you going to recruit? How are you going to recruit them? You even need your script or your email that you're going to send, where everything is clearly stated. You upload that protocol in the attached files section, but here it is your inclusion criteria and exclusion criteria. You then have to decide what kind of consent. If it is written consent, that means you are giving the consent form to your participants and they are signing it either physically or electronically. If you cannot get that signature, then you need that waiver of documentation. That only works for telephone surveys or online surveys or interviews. In those instances, you still need consent, but it could be like a check. It could be a question in your survey. Please check if you consent, and then they click consent, and that check mark counts as their consent. Or in the interview, you can orally ask and then audio record their statement of, yes, I consent to this research. There are a few times where you might want to waive consent altogether, but that's not often. This is what the consent form template looks like. Everything in red is what you would change to fill out to be your information. Please use the templates from UMSL. It will save you a lot of time. You then have to fill out the risks and benefits. I mean, the benefits should outweigh the risks or at least be equal. Typically, there are no risks outside of everyday risks with the kind of research we do, and there are no direct benefits. And that's totally fine to just say that. And then here's where you upload those files, okay? As a student with your dissertation, what you want to do is save it, then go to your saved projects and hit the print form. That will give you the PDF so that you can email the PDF version to your advisor. Once you hit submit, you cannot go back in there and hit this print view, and your advisor cannot see what you submitted. So you have to do this first.